David, welcome to Chicago Jewish Cafe. Uh, as you know, we're interested in fundamental issues of Jewish existence, and your organization, Maccabee Task Force, is dealing with one of the most important issues today, and that is anti Semitism on university campuses. And I would like to ask you about what you do, how well you succeed, and what is the situation there, and in which direction is it moving? I mean, today is 17th of Tammuz. I understand. I'm a little bit hungry. Probably you're a little bit hungry too. Um, you know, beginning of 3 weeks of toward Tisha B'av, and not a good time. And also, there's a new candidate for Democratic Party that is maybe even not even as good as Biden. Going completely different direction. So let's talk about it. Tell me, what is? I mean, now I understand that your Maccabee Task Force is one of the best, well-financed Jewish organizations to combat anti-Semitism on campuses. And you've been in existence, what, for 9 years?
That's right.
What did you do and how well you succeeded?
So we were created in 2015. Um, and Sheldon and Miriam Adelson were instrumental in launching this project and funding this project in our early years, and they still remain major funders. And they understood in 2015 what most members of our community didn't really understand until after October 7th, 2023. They understood that anti Semitism on college campuses was a real, deep, significant problem. It wasn't limited to this campus or that campus. It wasn't confined to liberal campuses on the East Coast. They understood this was a major problem on all of our campuses, and that we as a community had yet to invest significant time, attention, and resources to combating this problem. And so they launched the Maccabee Task Force to do exactly that, to provide the focus and the funding that had been lacking in our community. And it's amazing to me, they saw this back in 2015. Sheldon Adelson, I think, saw around a lot of corners. The rest of our community is just catching up. So before October 7th, I need to raise funds from other donors. I would approach donors with what we do, and I'd often get two responses. One, come on, campus anti-Semitism isn't really a serious problem. They're going to graduate, they're going to get jobs, they're going to get mortgages, and they're going to change their views. Not true. That's not what we see. This is a serious problem. Number two, they'd say, well, it's a problem, but do we really need to invest as much as you invest? We invest significantly in each of our campuses, and I'll explain why and how. Do we need to invest that much in combating it? Is it that serious? Yes, I think since October 7th now, everyone sees what we saw. It's a problem that demands a serious investment. So I went out early on, after our founding in 2015, and tried to figure out what do we do? How do we push back against campus anti-Semitism? And some of the things we learned, and we learned through the best teacher possible. We learned through trial and error. We funded projects that did not work. And I have the freedom a lot of other nonprofits don't have. I had the freedom to go back to my funders and say, didn't work. We need to try something different. Where I think most people in the nonprofit space feel that what they do has to work and they have to tell their donors it works and is the only thing that works in order to keep raising funds. I was given the freedom to do trial and error. So first of all, we have to understand a couple of things. When you speak about anti-Semitism on college campuses, there's all sorts of anti-Semitism on college campuses. There's only one kind that really has support on the campus, support from professors, support from a significant percentage of students, a real authenticity on campus and is not rejected. And that is the anti-Semitism that hides behind hatred of Israel, anti-Zionism. So if a neo-Nazi puts a swastika on a Hillel building tomorrow, that would be terrible. But it would be condemned from the administration to the professors to the students. I think even Students for Justice in Palestine might condemn a neo-Nazi swastika. But if you engage in a criticism of Israel that crosses the line from legitimate criticism to anti-Semitic criticism, if you engage in these gross double standards, if you compare Israel to Nazis, if you deny the right of the Jewish people to the right of self-determination, now all of a sudden, a lot of students are going to support it. Administrations are not going to condemn it. Professors are going to support it or not condemn it. This is the anti-Semitism we need to focus on when we talk about anti-Semitism on campus, because this is the anti-Semitism that's actually celebrated and accepted. So we realized early on we were going to focus on demonization and delegitimization of Israel, number one. Number two, when it comes to demonization and delegitimization of Israel, we're up against something bigger than most people realize. It's not just that Students for Justice in Palestine or Jewish Voices for Peace is coming onto a campus and working hard and persuading people to hate Israel. It's worse than that. The default position on the progressive left in America and on campus is now an anti-Israel narrative that is anti-Semitic. That's the default. That's where students on the left and the woke left start out. So different. When I went to school a long time ago, the default position for most students was sympathy for Israel. And people might not have loved Israel, people might not have been Zionists, but there was a sort of a default sympathy. Doesn't exist. College campuses in America today, and I'm just trying to speak objectively, not politically. The political power on almost every college campus in America is on the progressive left. You have conservative students on every campus. They don't dominate campus politics. They don't run student government. They don't dominate what happens on the campus quad. It's the progressive left. And now the default view of Israel on the progressive left is to embrace this false anti-Israel narrative. And again, everything I'm going to say now is false, but this is the dominant narrative on the left. They say Israel is a country of white settlers who came into the homeland of an indigenous people of color, killed them, expelled them, and then is subjecting the remainder to an apartheid state. And we know we live in woke times where everything is seen through the lens of race. And so what has happened now is the square peg of Israel has been shoved into the round hole of woke ideology. And students see this in terms of color, in terms of race, and immediately say Israelis are the white oppressors, Palestinians are the indigenous people of color who are being oppressed. Now, so none of that's true. Israeli Jews are indigenous to Judea, not Palestinian Arabs. Most Israeli Jews trace their roots back not to Europe, but to the Muslim Middle East from which their parents or grandparents were expelled. Israelis came and built cities and developed the economy so much that Arabs immigrated and immigrated to the Jewish areas. There were no expulsions. And then, of course, Israel's wars were launched.
David, it's amazing to me that the most multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic nation in the world, that is the nation Israel,
Yes.
is today proclaimed absolutely the whitest of the white.
That's exactly right. That's the bad news. But here's the good news that we found out. So what do we do about this? We're up against this default position on the left. We tried lots of things that failed, and I'm happy to discuss what failed. But the problem is America and the college campus is increasingly siloed. If you're on the progressive left, you exist within a progressive left silo that is tall and has thick walls. The only social media you consume shares the views of the progressive left. The media you consume reinforces those views. The professors to whom you listen reinforce those views. So if you have this default position on Israel and see Israel through this false lens, what can penetrate that silo to get you to see things differently? Bringing a speaker to campus? They're not going to leave their silo and show up to hear a speaker that Jewish students brought. Doing a falafel brunch, they're not going to leave their silo to go to the falafel brunch. The only thing that we found that can actually penetrate that silo and change hearts and minds is a trip to Israel. And the main thing we do on our campuses is the following. We work with local partners to map the campus Figure out who are the 20 or so students on that campus that dominate campus politics. Almost all of them are in this silo, progressive left. Recruit them on a trip to Israel and the Palestinian Authority. If they're not going to agree to go on our trip if they just hear from one side, they need to hear from both sides. Recruit them on a trip to Israel and the Palestinian Authority. The trip will change their minds, and this is critical. I want to get back to this. The trip will change their minds, and then you work with them upon their return to build broader coalitions that can defend Israel and Jewish students. But what was a surprise to me, and continues to be a surprise to me, and good news to share in the midst of all this bad news, is that the trip actually changes their minds. And this settles an issue for me that I think is often debated in our community. The students who are anti-Israel, who show up to protest Israel, are they anti-Semites and nothing will change their minds? Or are they good people who believe a false anti-Israel narrative? And the good news I have to report is not all of them. There are hardcore anti-Semites, on campuses. There are hardcore Israel haters on campus. Will never change their minds, and they could be as much as 8-10% of the campus. But most of these students that are part of this sort of intersectional progressive left on campus are good people who believe a false narrative. They believe a narrative about Israel that if I believed it, if you believed it, you'd hate Israel too. And so if we can show them that the truth is at odds with that narrative, we can change their minds, we can change their hearts, we can turn them from skeptics or even critics into friends and allies. And that's what our trip accomplishes. And from the first trip we did until the last trip we did just last week, I'm still in awe of the fact that these students actually care about the truth. And when confronted with the truth, it changes them. And they understand they've been lied to, and they want to do something about that. And we have to work with that decency that still exists, that love of truth that still exists, to show people the truth, and then work with them, having exposed them to the truth, to turn allies, to turn critics into allies who can then build bridges to their respective communities and empower us to build coalitions that win the day on campus. And that is the heart of what we do.
David, that sounds okay, although I have to say, not very convincing to me. I'm sorry.
Well,
Uh,
if I were sitting where you sat,
yeah.
I'd also be skeptical. Sitting where I sit, and now let me get into details, by the way.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Seeing what I see, I have to tell you, we can win these battles. So we have a choice right now, right? And this is everyone's debating this in our community. Things are so bad on campus. The anti-Semites are so much in control of our campuses. It's gone. It's over. Let's just give up. That's one choice. Right? The other choice, and we only have two choices here. The other choice, no, we can still fight and we can still win. Maybe we don't win all the time. We can still fight. We can still win. We can still claw back territory from the haters. I am of the firm conviction that that's the case. And if that's the case, then we have to not only keep fighting, we have to double down on what works. So those are our options.
David, that ultimately we're going to win, or at least the truth will win out, not necessarily individual people. I have no doubt. I am in full agreement with you. Um, throughout history of humankind, Israel was always object of attacks by evil forces. I mean, today we're again. And we came out, and then eventually other people were talking about their allies, for example, in America, allies where they saw in Germany Nazis, in Italy fascists. They were also very supportive. In America, a big portion of Americans were supportive. But then eventually, history turns everything upside down. But for me, the question today is really bothersome. Is why so many Jews, that is, nominal Jews, on campuses, students and faculty, actually support Palestinian murderers, interlopers, and and how does your Maccabee Task Force that takes people to Israel, which to me sounds like a gift or a bribe or a defensive action, which I don't believe Jews really need. You know, how how does it bring these Jewish uh, 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 supporters of Hamas, although they don't say they're supporters of Hamas, and maybe sometimes they do very often, like Jewish Voices for Peace, you
Right.
know, and not now, not in my name, whatever it is, you know, their names are. Uh, what do you do about that? Do you take, by the way, do you take Jews to Israel too?
We do, but in service of our strategic goal. So every
Mhm.
bus we bring, again, there's a lot, Alexander, there's a lot of work we as a community have to do. We're not presuming to do all of that work. So if you're saying we have more work to do within the Jewish community because a minority of Jews actually hates Israel, yeah, we do have more work to do in our community to reach that minority of Jews. That's not our goal. Our goal is actually to
It's
win
not the
that.
small minority. My understanding is about 35% of young Jews, you know, actually side with Hamas.
Polling I've seen it's not quite that high, but in either case,
In New
let's
York,
acknowledge.
after the October 7, I think the figure was 25% of New Yorkers, without differentiation by age, were
That makes
supportive of
sense.
Hamas.
Oh, sure, that makes total sense. New York's only a third Jewish, by the way.
I'm talking
Um,
about no, I'm talking about Jewish New Yorkers.
oh, yeah. So look, 15%, 30%, we have a problem, and we can discuss that problem. We have a problem of Jews being so progressive, so woke that they embrace the narrative that dominates. Look, many Jews in America, we have to understand something. Their real religion isn't Judaism. It's wokeism. It's progressivism.
Mm.
And if you're a Jew to whom being woke is more important than being Jewish, they know very little about being Jewish. Of course, you're going to hate Israel. So this problem I'm discussing, the fact that a false anti-Israel narrative dominates the woke progressive silo in America, which is the base of one of our two political parties. I don't want to underestimate that. This is an enormous problem we face. And the ramifications are beyond campus to the Jewish community, to the Jewish future, and to the US Israel relationship, because this is the very base that Joe Biden's afraid of, that Kamala Harris is afraid of, and feels they need to chase after by supporting Israel less. So this is a huge problem. I don't want to underestimate it. The question is, what do we do about it? We're one organization. We can't presume to do it all. The challenge we've taken on as it is bigger than we are. But we've taken on one piece of this. And the piece we've taken on is, how do we start winning again on campus? Because our belief is, if we just lose on campus or abandon the campuses, then students will go through 4 years without ever having the anti-Israel narrative ever challenged. And so don't be surprised if this terrible trend that we're talking about only grows and strengthens. But if we can challenge it, if we can show there's another side, if we can start winning victories on campus, well, then you can claw back territory and take a problem that is looming and dominant, and start little by little to change what's happening on the left. So we decided we were going to focus on winning on campus. If you want to win on campus, you got to get beyond the Jewish community to the people who dominate campus politics. So each of our buses, our ideal group is 20 campus leaders and influencers, most of whom are not Jewish, together with 5 pro-Israel students who are on that bus to build relationships with the leaders and influencers. That's our strategy. That's what we found
So
worked.
20, 20, 20 campus groups with
20 individuals.
20 individuals on different campuses.
So each of our campuses gets a bus for 25 students. So each campus gets to send 20 individual campus leaders and influencers,
Mm-hmm.
together with 5 pro-Israel students who are on the trip to build relationships with the leaders. 25 students per campus per year. It's a
How
big
do you
investment.
select those students? How do you select?
We work with our partners on the campus
Mm-hmm.
to map the campus and figure out who are the students who are most politically relevant, the most politically powerful. That means that by bringing them to Israel and changing their minds, we can win victories on the campus today. But these students typically go on to play a role on the left, on the progressive left, after they graduate. So we're also making a down payment on future friends and allies. And say what you will, I disagree with him on a lot. But you look like a leader like Richie Torres and the role he's played since the war started on October 7th. He's been a real profile and courage. Congressman Richie Torres from New York, a real friend and ally. And he's been this critical voice on the progressive left, reminding people that there's another side to the story and that the narrative that dominates the left is not the truth.
Was he one of your
Oh,
tourists?
no, we started after he was long off campus. However, one of our goals is how do we build more friends like Richie Torres in positions of influence on the left? Again, we could abandon the left, say it's lost, and then start fighting to defend our positions on the conservative right, which, by the way, we have problems now on the conservative right. I don't want to say that all is well on the conservative right. It's just better than it is on the left. So, hey, let's abandon the left. It's lost. All is lost. Let's abandon the Democratic Party. All is lost. And let's start at least fighting on the right. I think that would be foolish and unwise. Things are bad on the left. Things are bad in the Democratic Party. But we can fight. We can win. And every new ally, every victory, every new friend helps us claw back territory and make sure that the left does not become an echo chamber for the anti-Israel narrative, but that there's still a debate on the left.
I, I agree with absolutely everything that you said, with your feeling, with your intentions, and everything else. My question is only how effective it is.
Yeah.
Because I'll give you one example from your own history. I think her name is Lily Greenfield or Greenberg Cole or something like this. She was working for Biden.
Mm-hmm.
She a Jewish
Oh,
girl,
sure. Okay.
and she was, I think, one of the first, if not the first, people that was working for Biden that resigned from her job. I think as assistant of some department within Biden, uh, as in protest of
Yeah.
Biden's policy with regard to Israel. That is, she wanted, I guess, Hamas to win outright. Now,
Yeah.
my understanding is that she was one of your tourists to Israel, and it,
This is the first year telling me
yeah,
this. I've never heard this before.
yeah,
If we brought her, well, you may be right, you may be wrong. I don't know. If we brought her, we would have brought her as a pro-Israel student. So it's odd to me that someone would have suggested someone like this as a pro-Israel student.
yeah.
But
She
I
did
should note.
go as
But
a
I should note.
pro-Israel, but she also went as a pro-Israel.
Yeah. But I should note, Alexander, our first 2 years of doing this, I was able to say that we had no student that we brought to Israel come back still supportive of BDS, still supportive of the anti-Israel narrative. Then we start to get examples here and there of students we brought who came back and for whatever reason, and I'll get back to it, for whatever reason, began to engage again as anti-Israel students. It's still less than 1% of the students we bring, but I know of multiple examples now of students who came back and continued to be anti-Israel. And in most cases, because we follow up on each of these cases, because to me that's a real loss. We follow up, and in each case, everyone tells us that while they were on the bus in Israel, they were saying all the right things. They were saying, "I never knew
David,
this."
this particular student, not only was she
Yeah,
Jewish or is Jewish, but she
yeah,
also was working for IPAC and she was very
right,
active on the right, and then she switched after
right,
the trip.
right. So let me finish.
Yeah.
So during the trip, they say all sorts of things like, "I never knew this. I never understood that. I say I'm more sympathetic to Israel now." But then they get back to campus And these are the ones who continue to engage in anti-Israel activity. We understand it's peer pressure. They want a future in student government. They want a future running this or that organization with a woke agenda. And they realize that if they're going to succeed, they have to go back to their prior view. So I will not say, and I do not say, that what we do works 100% of the time. It does not. What's amazing is almost every data point we have shows it works over 90% of the time. It is incredibly and surprisingly effective. So the interesting example you bring, I want to look into it more.
Mhm.
But I wouldn't be shocked because we have had examples now, less than 1%, but examples of students coming back and continuing to engage in anti-Israel efforts. But overwhelmingly, our trip returnees fall into one of two camps. One, they say, you know what, this is a lot more complex than I realized. I ought not to be scapegoating and singling out Israel for blame the way BDS and other anti-Israel efforts do. That's about 50%. And in the world in which we live, moving someone from enmity to neutrality is a victory. It's a victory and one we need to appreciate. But the remaining 50%, and again, at the margins, there's this 1% we're not changing. But the remaining 50% go beyond that. And they say, not only will I no longer support those efforts, I'm going to fight those efforts. And of that 50%, about a third or more become full-blown members of the pro-Israel community, showing up at Hillel, showing up at the pro-Israel student meetings, just full-fledged members of the pro-Israel community. So the change. And by the way, this is data data is very important to us. Like every other group, we do post-trip surveys. We just did a post-trip survey with Black South African students who believed Israel was an apartheid country. 100% of them moved to be more favorable to Israel after our trip. Lately, though, the surveys have been more in the 90%. It's not 100%, but in the 90% move to be more favorable in the survey. But then we follow up 6 months and 1 year later with a more important data piece, which is not what did they say after the trip, but what did they do when they get back to campus. And there too, the overwhelming majority of them take pro-Israel actions, or at a minimum are moved to neutrality, and it is a very tiny exception that actually continues to engage in this stuff.
Well, so, that sounds. I'm for anybody doing anything in order to counterbalance the horrible anti-Semitism that has risen and continues to rise in society and on campuses. And what your organization is doing, along with other Jewish organizations, to me, is very, very good. You know, no
We
matter
have
whether you succeed or fail, I mean, it really makes no difference. By doing it, you already succeed. By doing anything like this, you'd succeed. However, my feeling is that something needs to be done more on campuses because, on one hand, there's an issue of protection of students, physical and psychological, emotional protection of students on campuses so they would feel proud being Jews. That is, to my mind, is the most important thing that can be done. I mean, Chabad's, Hillels, they're not all Hillels, by the way, are very good. I mean, many Hillels are headed by people that actually support BDS.
Well, Hillel has rules. You're not allowed to openly support BDS and be involved in Hillel. But I will agree with you that many Hillel leaders are not
I'm talking about the
out.
leaders of Hillels that I know of actually support BDS.
If you know a leader of Hillel that is publicly supporting BDS, give me their name because they're not allowed to have that position. It's a Hillel
I'm,
rule.
I'm, I'm not
And
going to do it because I do not want to use my personal knowledge in order
they might in private.
out
Uh,
somebody.
they might in private. They're not allowed to in public. But more importantly, I think a lot of them are many leaders in our community across the board. I don't want to single out Hillel directors, but there are Hillel directors like this. They're too busy chasing after young Jews rather than trying to educate and change young Jews. So if the young Jews are increasingly embarrassed by Israel, then they're going to be embarrassed by Israel. And they're not going to stand up proudly for Israel on campus. And that we see often, that they're not willing to really fight for Israel proudly on campus. They'd rather dodge the issue because Israel's unpopular. That's a failure of Jewish leadership.
Also, I mean, being proud for the fact of existence of the Jewish state of Israel is one area which I believe requires attention. But also another area which also requires attention, and that is being proud as a Jew. As a Jew that is a member of Am Israel, of separate nation that existed and continues to exist in variety of circumstances, good, bad, indifferent, and will continue to exist,
I think
with
you're
that.
right. I think you're right. My sense is when it comes to a sense of Jewish identity, a sense of being proud, being Jewish, the real work has to be done in Jewish homes. If you send your child off to college and that child is still not connected to their Jewish identity, not proud of their Jewish faith, not proud of the state of Israel, then you're sending them off into an environment where likely it's not going to get better, probably going to get worse. I mean, we definitely should take steps to change it. But let's face the reality in which we live, and let's face the reality of universities. And again, the culture on universities is something that is going to be very hard for any nonprofit to change. You're sending them into a dangerous situation. It's got to start at the home. But yeah, once they get to campus, it is good. It is.
Started the home, started this home. I do not know how to start at somebody's home. Did not know how to start in my
Well,
own home,
I would caution you against overestimating what good nonprofit organizations can do. We can play at the margins, right? Chabad's great. I'm glad there's a place for Jewish students who got to college without ever connecting with Judaism to go and connect with Judaism.
Mhm.
Hillel, many Hillels are very good. I'm glad there's a place. This is all good and all important. I just think if parents abdicate their responsibility, um, what you're playing around with is at the margins. So ultimately, what happens? Ultimately, you see what's happening in America. More and more secular Jews are being alienated from.
David, I understand. I wanted to ask you another question, which for me is of great interest. Before you became chief executive president of Maccabee Task Force, you were president of Christians for Israel or something.
Christians United for Israel.
Christians United for Israel.
You're right.
Now,
Yeah.
you're Jewish, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, and it's very interesting that Haggai appointed a Jewish guy to be in charge of Christians United for Israel. What was the situation? Why?
So I discovered evangelical support for Israel years ago. Before there was a kufa, and before our community, before the Jewish community had really spent much time thinking about it. In the late '90s, early 2000s, I was working for a Pennsylvania senator, Arlen Specter. Spent a lot of time in central Pennsylvania. Met
A
a lot
great senator in my mind.
He was. I discovered all these Christians who loved Israel and wasn't sure what to make of it. Our community, to the extent we had an opinion in these days, suggested that this was some odd end of times plot. They're supporting Israel to speed the second coming of Jesus, and when Jesus comes back, we all get killed or converted. It was a very odd conspiracy theory that was popular among Jews and didn't resonate with me. The Christians I met were really sincere and really seemed to love and care about the Jewish people. So I researched the phenomenon. I wrote a book about it. My first book, Standing with Israel, came out in 2006, in which I concluded what we were seeing when it came to Christian support for Israel was not some conspiracy theory, not some plot to get us, but was actually an outpouring of altruistic, Bible-based, not Bible-based support for Israel and the Jewish people. It was a great thing, something our community should embrace and cherish. I wrote my book and I met John Hagee. He's one of the stars of my book. If you write a book about pro-Israel Christians in America, it's John Hagee was going to feature prominently even back in 2006. And we connected, and we connected well. And he told me that I was still working as chief of staff for Arlen Specter, and he told me he had this dream. He wanted to create like a Christian APAC, a Christian pro-Israel movement. And he asked me to run it. He said, "Look, you know Washington. I don't. You know the Jewish community well, and you clearly understand us because I've read your book and I love your book." And I said to him, "Yeah, but Pastor, how will Christians respond to an organization where a Jewish guy is the executive director?" And he said to me at the time, and I didn't, and I saw he was right, but it took time for me to understand it. He said, "David, if a Christian's going to have a problem with you as our executive director, they're not our kind of Christian."
Wow.
It was a profound thing to say, but it was a true thing to say, because sadly, not all Christians in America love Israel. Only a certain type of Christian, a certain type of Christian who has a certain worldview, a certain biblical view, loves Israel. And the intersection between those Christians who love Israel and those Christians who love the Jewish people, it's almost complete. And so if you view the Jewish people, as chosen by God, if you view the promises that God made to the Jewish people as never revoked, irrevocable, if you believe God still loves the Jewish people, then it's going to lead to a view of Jews in Israel that is very philo-Semitic, very Zionist. And so the Christians who want to join a group called Christians United for Israel tend to be very philo-Semitic and had no problem with me as the executive director. And it was a great privilege for me. I spent a decade building Kufa. It was a great privilege for me to work with these people, to get to know these people, and to sort of have the deep
David,
relations.
those Christians that support Israel and in some ways support Jews, are they only evangelicals, or there's also non-evangelical, mainline and Catholic?
There are others. I'd say they are predominantly evangelical, and that's for reasons both theological and cultural. But we always tried. We didn't want Kufi to be Charismatics United for Israel, and Charismatics are sort of a subset of evangelicals. We wanted it to be Christians United for Israel. So we were very intentional about reaching out to mainline Protestants, very intentional in reaching out to Catholics, and we met with some success. But the majority did come from the ranks of evangelical Protestants.
Yeah, the relationship, the attitude on the part of Jews to our supporters, which I believe, Hagee group of supporters of Israel represents probably the most important ally that Jewish people have in the United States. I do not see anybody else. I mean, the left, when they were not actively anti-Semitic, and I believe that by being actively anti-Zionist, they have become actively anti-Semitic in the same way as the Soviet Union became after the Second World War. The when they were non-threatening to Jews, and many Jews joined them, it was one thing. But today, in my mind, when it seems like the destruct ideology of socialism, although not fully, but basically, has been replaced with actually anti-Semitism. That is the reason that they can go along with radical Islamists. That is the reason that they can go against everything that you'd think, they stand for, but they do this thing. And the only thing the Jews have today, in my mind, besides some segment of liberal Americans, you know, uh, it's evangelical Christians. And I thought maybe something could be done in order to broaden understanding and mm, create some better feelings in that area. Because if you ask, as you well know, any Jew, regarding, evangelicals or Christians, there's a general tendency to not reciprocate.
Well, I think the relationship with evangelicals is important. And so, yeah, I think it's important. Look, I think Kufi accomplished.
I do not mean only important. I meant to say that I believe that Jews must understand, in my mind, the way I understand it, that is, if there wouldn't be, I mean, Christians caused us all kinds of surahs throughout our history, but if there would not be branches of Christianity and Islam, after thousands of years of Jewish existence, the our people would be more like an old woman that never gave birth. I mean, for us, for me, the existence of Christianity, and I do not mean to imply that it's all easy. I mean, it's a difficult,
This is an important point.
yeah. Uh, this is an important byproduct of what we were created as Jewish people by God.
That's a very important point that you make. And I would note you're not alone in making it. Maimonides made the same point. If the mission of the Jewish people was to bring this moral code and these moral insights to the world, we would have failed miserably if not for the fact that Christianity uh, and to some extent Islam brought this moral code to billions we never would have reached.
Moral code is one thing, but relationship with God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is important. I mean, this is the foundation of our covenant. That is to be a thing by which God Himself can decide who to bless and who to curse. I mean, moral code is part of it, and the um, understanding of what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is evil, is one of it. But another thing is, in order to for people to have a measure, uh, and they do not recognize it as a measure at the time when they do it, but for God to be to see how other people treat Jews and then decide what to do with other people.
Mm,
I'll bless those who bless you, I'll curse
right,
those who badmouth you.
right.
I'm sorry,
Well,
I went into this thing, but
yeah,
one of the things, in the beginning, I want to talk only about Maccabee's Task Force, but when your organization, offered you, I'm very glad they did, as a person to talk to. I decided that it would be a good time to
sure.
raise that point as well.
Well, it's an important point, and so I think there's at the mega level, what you're saying, what Maimonides said is a more constructive way to view Christians and Muslims. Unfortunately, there is this Islamism that's gotten between Jews and Muslims. But then you look at the UAE, and you do see examples of Muslims who really do share this idea of Abrahamic faiths. So it's an important point at the high level. To bring it down to earth, we Jews need allies in America. And the
Absolutely, we
first,
need allies, but we also, with regard to the leftist Jews that we're talking about on campuses,
so
many of them are led and respond to the nominal Muslims on those campuses, Muslims that have been infected by the Islamist ideology. And what they overlook, and that is why another part of what we're talking about right now, in my mind, what they overlook is that if they want to be really Muslims and not just simply worshippers of some cult of death, they also need to consider that there's a reason why God sent Ishmael away from Isaac at the time of Abraham. That is, so Ishmael would not compete for the territory that was going to go to Isaac and Jacob. That is, to my mind, a very important point.
Well, it's an important point. If you want to compete for hearts and minds in the Muslim world, you need imams making that point. There are some
But
imams who
I'm
do.
talking about those students on the colleges who are Muslims, who are in front ranks of agitators against Israel.
I understand. And I think if you go to those students and you say, Alexander Gendler made a very interesting point about the Quran, I have a feeling they might not be moved. But
Mm.
if you say this and that imam made this point about the Quran, then they might be moved. So
But somebody,
we're going all over the place. Let me bring it back home,
yes,
please.
yeah,
If we're worried about political support for Israel in America, which is my driving concern, I long for the day, by the way, when Israel doesn't need America, Israel can be independent. Right now, I think Israel needs a strong U.S. ally. If you're worried about it, we need to do a couple of things simultaneously. Number one, we need to make sure Israel has support on the right. And there, Kufi and the evangelicals were critical to making sure that Israel is supported on the right. And we need to make sure that relationship continues to thrive or flourish while we understand there are new threats emerging on the right and that the power evangelicals have had on the right traditionally seems to be waning right now. And that's something I think the evangelical community needs to address. While we do that, things are still pretty good on the right. We just need to stay ahead of trends.
mm-hmm.
We need to look over on the left where things have gotten extraordinarily bad and make a decision. Is it so bad that we just no longer invest in it? Or do we invest in it because we can still win, we can still claw back territory, but then we have to understand our investments might not change things overnight. We're not going to invest a little bit on the campus and go from a campus that votes for BDS to a campus that loves Israel and flies the Israel. If those are your expectations, you will be disappointed. But should we go in, get involved in fighting person by person, opinion by opinion, clawing back territory, and winning victories on these campuses. Even this year, even during the war, we have won a lot of victories. We've defeated a lot of anti-Israel resolutions, but we've lost some. Do we engage in this fight? And when I surveyed the globe when I left Kufi, I thought this is the most important fight right now because this is where we're in the greatest danger. But I understood we were going to take a lot of lumps and we were going to win some and we were going to lose some. That's just the nature of where we are at right now.
Hmm. Anyway, David, I want to thank you very, very much for stopping by. And I hope that many people will put the URL of your organization right below. And I hope many people will get to know your organization and help you in every way they can. And I hope that your organization will look also for other things other than just taking people, to Israel and doing things with them there.
Well, with support from your viewers, as our budget grows, our ability to do good work grows. So,
Thank you. You do good
Bezrat
work, and
Hashem,
what is it?
Bezrat Hashem.
Ezrat Hashem. Yes, absolutely. And I want to say thank you to you, and hope to see you sometime in the future again, because it seems like you are part of organizations that play major role in American society and for
Thank you.
Jews.
We all do what we can. It was a pleasure to meet you, Alexander. Thank you for having me, and would love to chat again.
Thank you. You have a great day. Bye.
You too. Bye bye.